Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I had been looking forward to the book club all week. It was supposed to be my escape, a monthly gathering where we would sink into deep discussions about characters, themes, and plot twists. I had even gone out of my way to read every single page of the novel we had chosen. I highlighted important passages, jotted down my thoughts in the margins, and prepared a few questions I wanted to raise during the discussion. I thought everyone else would be just as excited. When I arrived, the room was already buzzing with conversation. Laughter filled the air, and people were exchanging warm greetings and compliments. At first, I assumed everyone was just warming up before diving into the book. I found a seat near the middle of the circle and waited for someone to mention the story. But instead of talking about the book, they kept asking the new people about their jobs, families, and where they lived. I thought maybe I was too early, that we were just giving everyone time to settle in. I checked my watch. It was already 20 minutes past the scheduled start time. I waited a bit longer, trying to be patient, smiling when others made eye contact, and nodding when someone complimented my scarf. But inside, I felt a slow wave of confusion rising. Someone asked one of the new members if she had kids, and that sparked a long conversation about parenting and school systems. Another woman brought up a local bakery she liked, and then there was a 5-minute tangent about cupcakes. I kept glancing at the stack of books on the coffee table, hoping someone would make the transition. My copy of the book was in my lap, covered in sticky notes, practically begging to be opened. After half an hour of waiting, I cleared my throat and tried to steer the group toward the topic. I said I had found a scene near the end of the book, especially moving, and wanted to know what others thought. There was a pause, then someone gave a polite smile and said they had not quite finished it yet. Another said they had been meaning to start, but life had just gotten in the way. A third woman chuckled and admitted she never reads the books, she just comes for the people. There was laughter, and a few others nodded, saying the same. I sat there, still holding my annotated copy, feeling a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I had spent late nights reading, even skipped a movie with a friend just to finish on time. It felt like no one else had put in any effort at all. They moved on to discussing someone's recent trip out of town. I watched as they passed around photos on a phone, the conversation alive with interest. It was as if the book club had nothing to do with books anymore. I wondered if it ever had. Maybe I had misunderstood the point entirely. I stayed quiet for most of the rest of the meeting. I didn't want to come off as rude, but I also felt disconnected. These were nice people, sure, but we clearly had different expectations. When the evening finally wrapped up, someone cheerfully asked if I'd be coming next time. I forced a smile and said I would try, though I knew the answer in my mind. On the way home, I thought about why it bothered me so much. It was not just about the book, it was about time. I had carved space in my week, made the effort, showed up prepared. I had looked forward to the kind of conversation that leaves you thinking for days afterward. Instead, I felt like I had walked into a social mixer disguised as something else. At home, I made tea and sat down with my copy of the novel again. I flipped through my notes, rereading the parts that had stuck with me. There was a particular chapter where the main character faced a difficult choice, one that reminded me of something from my own past. I had hoped to hear other perspectives on that moment, maybe even gain new insights. But the opportunity had passed. I started wondering if other book clubs were the same. Was this just how they work now, more about company than content? Or had I simply stumbled into a group that no longer cared about the original mission? I thought about starting my own club, one where the book would always be the focus. I even pictured how I might invite people carefully, screening for those who actually wanted to read. But then I paused. Maybe it was not about creating another club. Maybe I just needed to find the right people. There had to be others out there who still loved the feeling of closing a good book and needing to talk about it. People who did not see reading as a checkbox but as an experience worth sharing. That thought gave me a small sense of relief. In the days that followed, I searched online for other local groups and forums. I found a few that seemed more aligned with what I wanted. Some were smaller, more intimate, and emphasized actual discussion. I sent out a few messages, careful not to get my hopes up too high. I had learned my lesson about assumptions. I also kept reading. It felt good to enjoy stories without pressure, just for myself. I still wanted to talk about them, but I no longer felt desperate for someone else to validate the experience. The book I had read for the club stayed on my coffee table for a while longer. It was a reminder that not every disappointment is a dead end. Sometimes it just redirects you to the path you were supposed to be on. Eventually, I got a reply from a smaller group meeting at a quiet cafe. They promised real discussion and asked about my favorite genres. I attended their next session, a little cautious but open-minded. This time, the conversation was thoughtful, focused, and filled with genuine curiosity. We didn't always agree, but that was the best part. As I walked out of that meeting, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while: satisfaction. Not because I had impressed anyone or led the discussion, but because I had finally found what I was looking for. A place where books mattered again. A space where stories sparked connection instead of just passing the time. That first club taught me an important lesson. Sometimes people use labels loosely. What you see on the outside doesn't always match the core. And that's all right. Not every door leads where you thought it would. But if you keep looking, the right ones eventually open. Story 2. I showed up early that Saturday, wanting to get a good look at what the flyer had promised would be an intimate glimpse into the soul of our community. The pop-up art show was set up in a repurposed warehouse downtown, the kind of place that always smelled faintly of damp wood and old paint. People milled about slowly, wine glasses in hand, murmuring in that way art crowds do, trying to sound like they understood everything on the walls. The lights were dimmed just enough to create a sense of importance, the kind of ambience that makes you feel like you should be whispering. I felt a mix of excitement and curiosity walking in, unaware that it would be one of the most disturbing afternoons I would experience in recent memory. The photographs were black and white, mostly printed large and mounted on canvas. The first few I saw were of street scenes, familiar alleys and park corners, old women seated on plastic stools under a tree, teenagers laughing on sidewalks. There was something raw about them, something that felt alive and unfiltered. I assumed at first that the people in these photos had posed intentionally, maybe even participated in a community project. But the further I walked into the gallery, the more something began to feel off. One photo in particular stopped me cold. It was of a man sitting outside a bakery, looking directly into the camera with a half-eaten piece of bread in his hand. I recognized him instantly. I passed him nearly every morning on my way to the market. He usually waved or gave a quiet nod, and I had always found his presence comforting. But seeing him on the wall like that, displayed for people to analyze, made my stomach turn. I moved on, trying to give the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they had asked for permission. Maybe there was a waiver I did not know about. But another image made that harder to believe. A woman sitting at the bus stop near the grocery, her shirt slipping off one shoulder, her eyes cast downward. It was a candid moment, clearly unposed, and it felt deeply personal in a way that made me uncomfortable. By the time I reached the back of the gallery, I noticed more people were whispering. Some were smiling, pointing out locations they recognized. One man nudged his friend and laughed quietly while gesturing toward a photo of an older man bathing in the river. There was no attempt to disguise the voyeurism. No reverence, no respect, just amusement and commentary. It became impossible to ignore. Many of the photographs were of people who clearly had not known they were being photographed. They were eating, resting, stretching, adjusting their clothes. These were intimate, vulnerable moments, not staged or public performances. And they were hung up like trophies, like prizes taken from people too poor or too busy to protest. I began to feel like I had walked into something I was not meant to see. Not because it was exclusive or elite, but because the images felt stolen. It was not art, not in the way I understood it. It was a violation dressed up in gallery lighting and polite applause. And I started to notice that others were realizing the same thing. An older woman beside me frowned as she looked at a picture of two children sleeping on cardboard under a bridge. She shook her head, then looked around as if searching for someone to explain why this was acceptable. Another man simply walked out, not even bothering to finish his wine. The crowd had started to shift. The initial awe was thinning, replaced with unease and tension. I stood there in front of a photo of a teenager picking at a plate of food, taken through the window of a small canteen I knew well. His mouth was open mid-chew, his eyes half closed, unaware and exposed. I remembered sitting at that very table once, watching the world go by, never once imagining that someone might be lurking nearby with a camera. My skin crawled with the thought that maybe I too had been captured, hung up, judged. I approached one of the attendants near the entrance and asked if the subjects had given permission. She hesitated, smiled too quickly, and muttered something about the artist's vision in public spaces. I pressed further, but she deflected, pointing me toward a small plaque on the wall that explained the project as a tribute to urban authenticity. That phrase meant nothing to me. It sounded like an excuse, a way to avoid saying what it really was. As I stood reading that plaque, another man walked up, stared at it for a moment, and laughed under his breath. He shook his head and muttered something about exploitation before walking off. I turned back to the photos, now unable to see them as anything other than violations. These people were not characters. They were not props. They were neighbors, strangers, members of the same community as the artist, and none of them had agreed to be on display. I left shortly after. The sunlight outside hit me hard, like waking up from a bad dream. I stood on the sidewalk, looking at the warehouse door, feeling this heaviness in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but something close. Disgust, maybe. Disappointment, definitely. And guilt, because for a moment I had been a part of it. On the way home, I passed a few of the same corners featured in those photographs. The people were still there, going about their lives, unaware of what had been done with their images. It made me think about how often things like this probably happen, quietly, without notice. Cameras are everywhere now. So is art. And somewhere along the way, the lines have been blurred. When I got home, I sat down and tried to make sense of what I had seen. I thought about privacy and dignity, and the difference between documenting a moment and exploiting it. I thought about how easy it is to convince yourself that something is beautiful when it is dressed up as art, even when it is built on someone else's discomfort. I kept going over the faces in those frames, wondering how many of them would ever know they were on display. Later that evening, I walked back to the warehouse. The show was still open for a few more hours. I did not go inside. Instead, I stood across the street, watching the shadows move behind the windows. I wanted to believe that maybe the artist had good intentions, that maybe there was something I had missed. But I could not shake the feeling that this was not just about expression. It was about power, or about who gets to capture and who gets captured. Before I left, I pulled out my phone and deleted a few pictures I had taken of people earlier that week, pictures I had snapped without thinking. I realized then that it is not just artists and galleries who cross those lines. It is all of us. Every time we forget that people are not just images. They are not subjects to be studied. They are not content. The next morning, I stopped by the canteen where that photo of the teenager had been taken. He was there again, eating quietly, earbuds in. I thought about telling him, about showing him the picture, but I did not. I just sat down a few tables away, ordered coffee, and promised myself I would be more careful, more thoughtful, more human. Something changed in me after that show. I still enjoy art, still believe in its power. But I also understand now that intention does not erase harm. That beauty does not justify invasion. And that the truest art might be in choosing not to take the picture, not to share it, not to hang it up for strangers to see, but to let someone have their moment in peace, untouched, unframed, and unseen. Story 3. He got on at one of the smaller stations, a stop barely anyone uses. The train car was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear the buzz of overhead lights. I was sitting alone by the window with my bag on the seat next to me, earbuds in but not playing anything. He walked in, scanned the space, and sat right across from me without hesitation. I noticed he had something in his hands, a thick stack of paper. At first, I thought it might be a script or maybe paperwork for work. He was dressed like someone who worked in an office, button-up shirt, slacks, a messenger bag slung across his shoulder. The papers were neatly stapled in bundles, corners aligned too perfectly. But when I looked closer, I saw the colors. Blocks of blue and white and pink stood out, and then it clicked. They were screenshots of my social media posts. Not just recent ones either. I could make out a photo I posted months ago, one of those throwback kinds that gets more likes than usual. A few others looked like tweets, my own words printed out in black and white, captions I barely remembered writing. He kept flipping through them like a student reviewing notes before an exam. Each flip of the page felt louder than it should have. My heart started beating faster. I turned my face slightly toward the window to avoid eye contact, hoping he did not notice I had seen. But my hands were clenched in my lap. I was trying not to breathe too loudly, trying to stay still. I did not want him to know I had realized what he was holding. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him glance from the papers to me. It was not quick or uncertain. It was the kind of look someone gives when they are double-checking something. My stomach turned. I felt like I was being measured, like I had become part of some checklist he was working through. I reached for my phone slowly. It was already unlocked. I opened the Notes app and typed a message to myself, just in case something happened. It felt silly, but I had to do something. I typed the train number and described what the man looked like, then saved it. I thought about texting someone but couldn't decide what to say without sounding paranoid. He kept reading. He was mouthing some of the captions as he went along. His lips barely moved, but I could tell. A few times I saw him smirk, like something I wrote amused him. He leaned back a little, adjusted himself like he was settling in for a show. I could not take it anymore. I stood up, pretending to stretch, and walked to the other side of the train car. My heart was racing so hard it felt like my whole chest was pulsing. I sat down again, a few rows behind him. From there I could still see him, but he could not see me unless he turned around. He didn't. He just kept flipping through my posts, page after page. I thought about getting off at the next stop, but it was still over half an hour away. My palms were sweating. I looked around and realized we were the only two in that part of the train. That did not help. I considered moving to a different car, but I did not want to pass by him again. I kept hoping someone else would come in, maybe a conductor or another passenger. Anyone. The longer I sat there, the more I felt like prey. I started replaying everything I had posted recently in my head. Photos of coffee, quotes, a few selfies, location tags. Had I posted something that made me too easy to find? I usually turned off the location, but sometimes I forgot. I cursed myself for not being more careful. The train jerked slightly, and a voice came over the speaker announcing the next station. It was still 2 stops away. I told myself to breathe. I reminded myself that nothing had happened yet, that he was just sitting there. But deep down I knew it was not nothing. I remembered a photo I had posted just last week, one taken on a train just like this. I had joked about how peaceful it was, how empty. The caption said something about loving solitude. I imagined him seeing that and knowing where to look. The thought made my throat close up. Suddenly he stood. I froze. He gathered the papers, organized them neatly, and placed them in a plastic envelope. Then he slung his bag back over his shoulder and walked toward the exit. I held my breath the entire time he passed my row. He did not look at me. He stood by the doors as the train slowed to a stop. I watched him step off onto the platform and walk away without turning back. I exhaled so sharply I startled myself. My hands were trembling. I sat there for a moment, unsure if I should get off too or stay put. I decided to wait. I needed a few minutes to pull myself together. I stared out the window at the platform. He was gone, completely out of sight. I kept wondering what the hell that was. Why he had those papers. Why me? Me. When I got home later that day, I went through every social account I had. I set everything to private, deleted photos, changed usernames. I messaged a friend and told her what happened. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. I had seen the posts with my own eyes. For weeks I avoided the train. I took buses or asked for rides, even if it meant taking longer to get places. I kept checking my surroundings every time I was in public. I changed the way I walked. I stopped posting anything at all. I just vanished from the digital space. Eventually, I went back to the train. I had to. Life does not stop just because you are scared. But I never sat in the same seat again. And I never rode without looking at who else was getting on. It took me time to feel safe again. The hardest part was knowing I would never get answers. He did not take anything from me, not physically, but he still took something. The sense of privacy I thought I had, the illusion that I was just another person on the internet. But I learned that what we share can become something we do not expect. I learned to protect myself better. I learned that fear can be a warning, not a weakness. And I promised myself that if anything like that ever happened again, I would not freeze. Now I still ride the train. I still go places alone. But I watch. I remember. And I trust my instincts, even when they whisper instead of scream. Story 4. I took the job because I needed extra cash and it seemed easy enough. Go into a store, act like a regular customer, then write up a report about the service and cleanliness. Most of the time it was boring. A lot of awkward small talk and walking around pretending to be interested in items I had no plans to buy. But that day was different. That day still makes my stomach turn. The assignment was for a small electronics store in a strip mall, not far from my apartment. The report brief said it was a locally owned business and that I should pay close attention to how the owner interacted with customers. I arrived around 2 p.m., planning to be in and out in 30 minutes. When I walked in, I was hit with a strange mix of musty carpet and burnt plastic. The air felt heavy. A man behind the counter greeted me with a wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He asked if I needed help, and I gave the standard response I always did during these jobs. I said I was just browsing and would let him know if I had questions. He kept looking at me though, watching me a little too closely. Something about it set me on edge. I moved through the aisles slowly, pretending to examine the gadgets and accessories. I snapped a few discreet photos with my phone for the report later. He followed me under the pretense of offering help, hovering nearby with every turn I made. I asked a question about a phone charger just to keep things feeling normal. His answers were vague, like he didn't actually care about the products. He kept steering the conversation back to me, asking personal questions. Where I worked, if I lived nearby, what brought me to the store. I gave non-committal answers and tried to inch toward the exit, but he cut in front of me casually, just blocking the path enough that it felt deliberate. He smiled again and said he had something special in the back, a newer model of the product I asked about. I told him it was fine, I didn't need to see it, but he insisted. He gestured toward the back room, said it would only take a minute. I froze for a second, heart thudding. Something about his tone was too eager. I said I really had to be going, that I might come back another time. His face changed then, just slightly. The smile dropped for a split second before he plastered it back on. He said it would mean a lot if I just took a quick look, that he always liked talking to customers like me. I didn't like the way he said that. When I declined again, firmer this time, he stepped closer. Not touching me, but close enough to make it clear he was trying to intimidate. My phone was in my hand, but I didn't want to make it obvious that I was about to record. I kept it low by my side and pressed the button to start a voice memo. My fingers trembled slightly. He motioned again to the back room and said, "Just 5 minutes, come on." I took a step back and said no, louder this time. He stepped to the side, pretending to be casual, but he was between me and the door again. I glanced past him, calculating how fast I could move if I had to. My breath was shallow. Then I said I had to use the restroom, hoping to get some distance. He pointed toward a small hallway near the back, and I cursed internally. I was expecting him to say they didn't have one for customers. Instead, he used it as another opportunity to trap me. I acted like I was heading that way, but turned quickly and walked fast toward the door. He called out behind me, asking if I was upset, if he had done something wrong. I didn't answer. I pushed the door open and stepped into the fresh air, heart pounding. I didn't run, but I walked fast to my car, trying not to look back. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaky hands. Once I was out of the lot, I pulled over to a safer area and called the agency. I told them exactly what had happened and emailed over the audio recording. They told me to write a full incident report and said they would escalate it. I never went back to that store. I heard a few weeks later that the agency cut ties with that client. The memory stuck with me, though. It was a reminder that even something as simple as pretending to shop can carry risk. That gut feeling I had, I was glad I listened to it. I kept thinking what might have happened if I had followed him into that back room. I didn't want to imagine it. I never saw him again, but for a long time I double-checked every exit in every store I entered. I stayed hyper-aware of anyone who stood too close or asked too many questions. I learned how to trust that quiet voice in the back of my mind that tells me when something feels off. That job changed how I move in the world. Over time, I went back to doing mystery shopping jobs, but I was more cautious. I asked the agency to assign me only to public, well-staffed locations. I made sure someone always knew where I was going and when I'd be back. I kept the voice memo app ready and open on every visit, just in case. I never let that experience scare me into silence or isolation. If anything, it made me more determined to protect myself and speak up when something isn't right. I know not everyone gets out of a situation like that unharmed. I was lucky. Luck, and a quick decision to walk away. Some days I still get flashes of that store. The smell, the way his smile twisted. But then I remember I got out. I trusted my instinct. I did what I needed to do, and I never let him trap me. Story 5. I shared a cab with someone, and later they sent me a video from our ride that I did not know was being recorded. At first, I was surprised to receive the video message. I did not remember seeing any cameras or noticing that the ride was being filmed. It made me wonder how long they had been recording without my knowledge. The thought made me uncomfortable because I value my privacy deeply. When I first got into the cab, I was just focused on getting to my destination. I did not pay attention to any devices inside the vehicle. The ride felt normal, and I was chatting casually with the person beside me. I never suspected that any recording was happening. Looking back, I wished I had noticed if there was a camera or a phone pointed somewhere. Receiving that video later brought back all the moments from the ride, but it also raised many questions in my mind. Why had they recorded it without telling me? Was it just a harmless recording, or did they have some other reason? I felt uneasy about being filmed secretly. It made me question the boundaries of trust between strangers. I asked myself if I had said anything private or personal during the ride. If so, those moments were now captured without my consent. It felt like a breach of trust, even though we were just sharing a simple cab ride. I wondered if it was legal or ethical to record someone without their permission in such a situation. The more I thought about it, the more concerned I became. The person who sent me the video did not provide any explanation or warning before sharing it. I felt caught off guard, as if my privacy had been invaded. I did not want to jump to conclusions, but the lack of communication bothered me. It was as if they did not consider my feelings or right to know about the recording. I debated whether to respond to their message or ignore it altogether. Part of me wanted to ask why they recorded me without telling me. Another part wanted to protect my boundaries and avoid confrontation. But after some thought, I decided it was important to address the issue. I sent a polite message asking why they had recorded the ride and if they had intended to share the video with others. Their reply was vague and did not fully answer my questions. They said it was just a fun thing to remember the ride. I did not feel reassured by that explanation. It seemed dismissive of my concerns about privacy and consent. I realized then that not everyone understands how important these things are. Feeling uneasy, I looked into local rules about recording in public or semi-private spaces like a cab. The laws were complicated but leaned toward requiring consent for audio recordings. Video recording rules were less clear, especially if there were no obvious signs or warnings. This left me feeling unsure about my rights in this situation. I thought about how easy it is today to capture and share moments instantly without asking for permission. People often forget that just because something is possible does not mean it is respectful. I wished more awareness existed about personal boundaries and consent in everyday interactions. It made me cautious about sharing space with strangers from then on. Despite feeling uncomfortable, I wanted to find a way to move past the incident. I told myself that it was not a huge violation, but still a reminder to be vigilant. Trust is something that has to be earned, even in simple moments like a shared cab ride. I promised myself to speak up if something like this ever happened again. To protect myself in the future, I decided to check the inside of any vehicle I enter for cameras or recording devices. It felt like a small step to regain control. Being aware of my surroundings helps me feel safer and more respected. I realized that standing up for my privacy is important, even in small ways. In the end, I chose to let go of the discomfort and not hold a grudge against the person. I do not know if they meant any harm or if they even thought it was wrong. Sometimes people do things without realizing the impact on others. I focused on learning from the experience rather than dwelling on the negative. This situation reminded me that boundaries are personal and sometimes invisible until they are crossed. It made me appreciate the importance of communication and respect. I hope that if I am ever in a similar situation again, I will be prepared to handle it better. Privacy is something I will protect, quietly but firmly. Overall, I am grateful that the video did not reveal anything too personal or embarrassing. I am relieved that I can still feel safe in everyday interactions. This experience taught me a valuable lesson about trust and vigilance. Moving forward, I carry that lesson with me quietly but clearly. The shared cab ride could have been just another ordinary moment, but the unexpected video changed how I see these encounters. It was a reminder that respect for privacy matters everywhere, even in small, fleeting moments. I now know that it is okay to question and set limits. That knowledge gives me a quiet strength. In the quiet that followed, I felt a sense of closure. I accepted what had happened and chose to move on with more awareness. Life sometimes offers lessons in unexpected ways, and this was one of them. I am ready to face future moments with confidence and calm. The video no longer holds power over me. It is just a reminder to be mindful and to value my own boundaries. I am glad I spoke up and trusted my feelings. That has made all the difference. Story 6. When I accepted the job offer, I thought it was the fresh start I needed. A new city, a new role, and a cheap apartment close to the office seemed like a dream. The place was older, tucked between two newer buildings, but it had character. I signed the lease quickly, eager to move in and settle down. It felt like the right step forward after everything I had left behind. The first few days passed without anything unusual. I unpacked, explored the area, and got used to the sounds of the neighborhood. Pipes rattled sometimes, and the wind made the windows creak, but it was nothing I could not live with. I chalked it up to the age of the place. Still, I could not shake the feeling that something felt a little off. At night, I started hearing faint noises above the ceiling. It sounded like soft shuffling or something brushing against the floorboards in the attic. The first time, I thought it was just rats or maybe a raccoon. But the sounds were too deliberate, too slow and steady. There was a rhythm to them that animals would not follow. I mentioned it casually to the landlord during a phone call about the heater, but he brushed it off. He said the attic was sealed and had not been used in years. He even laughed a little and told me I was probably just adjusting to the creaks and groans of an old house. I did not argue. I wanted to believe that was all it was. One evening, while reading in bed, I heard a clear thud from above. It was not loud, but it was heavy, like someone had dropped something and tried to do it quietly. I paused and listened, heart beating faster. Then came another sound, a slow dragging noise that made the ceiling vibrate just slightly. I sat up, staring at the ceiling in the dim light. I grabbed a broom and tapped the ceiling where the sound had come from. The noise stopped. I waited in silence, the broom still in my hand, until my arm began to ache. Nothing more happened that night. I convinced myself again that it was just my imagination or maybe some loose boards settling. A few nights later, I found the attic door slightly ajar. It was located in the hallway near the bathroom, and I had not even noticed it before. The chain that usually kept it shut was broken, hanging loosely from the hook. I stood there staring at it, wondering how it had come undone. A strange chill ran through me. I got a chair and peeked up into the darkness with a flashlight. The beam caught dust particles floating in the air and a few old boxes, but nothing else. I did not see anyone. Still, something about that space made me feel watched. I quickly shut the door and secured it with a metal latch I bought the next day. From then on, things became stranger. I started misplacing things I knew I had left in specific spots. Food disappeared from the fridge, only small amounts at first, but it added up. My keys were moved, and once my phone ended up under the couch when I knew I had left it charging in the bedroom. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I set up a motion sensor in the hallway near the attic door. It was basic and cheap, but it worked. A few nights later, it went off around 3 a.m. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and grabbed the flashlight. When I got to the hallway, the attic door was once again open. The latch had been undone from the inside. I called the landlord again, this time with more urgency. He agreed to come by the next morning to inspect the place. When he arrived, we both went up into the attic together. What we found made my stomach twist. In the far corner, hidden behind insulation and old furniture, was a small makeshift bed. There were used food wrappers, a flashlight, and even some of my missing items. Someone had been living there. The landlord looked pale and kept muttering that he had no idea. We called the police, who searched the attic more thoroughly and confirmed the presence of someone, but they were already gone. The officers said it was not the first time they had seen something like this. People sometimes squatted in vacant properties or found ways to sneak into occupied homes. I could not believe someone had been living just a few feet above my head, watching me, listening, moving around only when they thought I was asleep. I changed the locks and installed a more secure door latch for the attic. The landlord paid for additional security measures, including a new camera. But for a while I could not sleep properly. Every noise made me jump. I started sleeping with a light on, something I had not done since I was a child. In time, the fear began to fade. No more sounds came from the attic, and nothing went missing. The motion sensor remained silent, and I stopped waking up in the middle of the night with panic in my chest. Slowly, I started feeling like the apartment was truly mine. It became home. I never found out who the person was or how long they had been up there. The police never caught anyone, and the trail went cold. Part of me still wonders if they had watched me move in and decided to stay hidden, or if they had been living there long before I arrived, making just enough room for themselves to stay unnoticed. I chose to stay in the apartment, despite what happened. Something about facing that fear and reclaiming the space gave me a strange sense of strength. I made it mine with new furniture, warm lighting, and familiar routines. Life settled back into something calm and manageable. Now, when I look back on that time, I no longer feel dread. I feel cautious, sure, but also proud of how I handled it. It could have gone much worse. I got out safely, and I protected myself without losing control. The attic is still up there, locked and quiet, but it no longer feels like a threat. It taught me to trust my instincts and pay attention to the signs. I learned that fear does not have to control you. It can warn you, guide you, even make you stronger. I live with a little more awareness now, but not with fear. My life in this new city, in that same old apartment, continues on. Story 7. I installed the doorbell camera mainly because of package thefts in the neighborhood. There had been stories going around about someone stealing deliveries in broad daylight, and I did not want to take chances. It was a basic model, motion activated with night vision and cloud storage. I tested it a few times and got used to the alerts on my phone. It made me feel a little more secure, especially since I lived alone. A few weeks passed with nothing more than the occasional raccoon or passing neighbor triggering the motion sensor. It became background noise in my daily routine. Most nights I would check it briefly before going to bed, just out of habit. That night started the same way, quiet and uneventful. I brushed my teeth, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed, phone resting on the nightstand. It was close to 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a notification. I normally would not have checked, but something about the timing made me curious. I unlocked the screen and opened the camera app. The thumbnail image stopped me cold. There was someone standing right at my door, facing the camera. He was not doing anything, not knocking or moving, just standing there. His posture was stiff, like he had been caught mid-step and forgot how to move. His face was visible under the porch light, pale and emotionless. I tapped to view the live feed, thinking it must be a glitch. But no, he was still there, eyes open and staring straight ahead. I waited a moment, expecting him to leave or maybe ring the bell, but he did not. I started recording just in case and kept watching. The man did not blink, Not once. It was as if he had no reason to. He just stood in complete silence. I did not recognize him, and he had no delivery uniform or bag. There was nothing in his hands. He wore a thin jacket despite the cold, and his hair looked slightly wet like he had been out in the mist. I started to feel uneasy, so I locked the bedroom door and turned off the lamp. I sat in the dark, staring at my phone screen. Minutes passed. 10, then 20. Still, he stood motionless. The timestamp on the recording confirmed he had not moved. I thought about calling 911, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That a man was standing still on my porch. I texted a friend instead, hoping for reassurance or advice. No response. They were probably asleep, which made sense at that hour. I was wide awake now, heart racing, fingers cold. I stayed glued to the screen, waiting for something to happen. Around 2:30 a.m., he finally moved. He stepped back, slowly, like he had just remembered how to walk. Then he turned not toward the street, but toward the side of the house. My breath caught. I had a narrow side yard with a fence, nothing back there but trash bins and a locked gate. I jumped up and rushed to the front window, peeking through the blinds. I could not see him anymore. The motion light on the side did not turn on. The camera lost him once he left the frame. My mind raced through possibilities. Was he trying to break in? I stayed by the window for what felt like an hour. I never saw him again that night. Morning came, and I reviewed the footage. He had been standing there for over an hour without making a sound. Just staring, expressionless, eyes wide open. I called the non-emergency police line and told them everything. They said they would increase patrols in the area, but admitted there was not much they could do without a crime. The officer on the phone advised me to keep the footage and to call immediately if it happened again. I agreed, though it felt like a small comfort. The next night I barely slept. Every creak in the house felt louder. Every shadow in the corner of my eye made me jump. I kept the camera app open the entire time, constantly refreshing, waiting for that familiar shape to reappear. But it did not. Meow. Days went by. Then weeks. Nothing unusual happened. The man never came back, and I started to relax, though not completely. I still checked the app before bed, still kept my phone close at night. The fear faded but never fully left me. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it every day. Life resumed. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner, and got on with things. The doorbell camera stayed where it was, quietly watching. Most nights it caught nothing but cats or the mail carrier. But months later, I was cleaning out the camera storage and came across the clip. I watched it again, expecting to feel the same dread I had that night. But I felt something different. I paused the video on his face and stared. He did not look threatening. He looked lost. I noticed something I had missed before. His eyes were red, not from anger, but like he had been crying. His mouth trembled slightly, like he was on the verge of speaking. But he never did. Maybe he could not. Maybe he came to my door not to hurt me, but because he had nowhere else to go. That thought stuck with me. Maybe I was never in danger. Maybe he just needed someone to see him. The fear I carried turned slowly into curiosity, even a kind of quiet empathy. I would never know his story, never learn who he was or what brought him to my porch. But I stopped being afraid. I even left a note on the door for a while, just a small piece of paper with a message. If you need help, you can knock. I never got a knock. No one ever mentioned the man again. Life moved on. I still have the camera. It still records every night. I still check the feed now and then. But I do not expect him to return. I just hope, wherever he went, he found whatever he was looking for. Story 8. It was a slow Sunday afternoon when I decided to check out a local thrift store tucked between a closed barber shop and a laundromat. I had driven past it dozens of times, but for some reason that day I felt pulled inside. The dusty glass door creaked as I stepped in, and the place smelled faintly of old books, mothballs, and something I could not quite place. Rows of mismatched furniture and racks of vintage clothes made the narrow aisles feel like a maze. I was not looking for anything in particular, just passing time. I made my way toward the back, where heavier winter clothes were displayed even though it was spring. Hanging on the end of a rack was a dark green jacket, the kind with the military cut and thick wool lining. It looked brand new, strangely out of place among the threadbare coats beside it. The stitching was precise, buttons heavy, and it fit me perfectly when I tried it on. Something about it felt different, like it had not been meant to end up here. The tag said $5. No brand name, no size. The cashier barely looked up as I paid in cash and left with the jacket draped over my arm. I did not wear it out the door. It felt too formal, too stiff, and I figured I would wash it first before wearing it properly. At the time, I had no idea how important that decision would turn out to be. Once I got home, I laid it flat on the table and gave it a closer inspection. The fabric was tough but comfortable, the seams reinforced and smooth. As I turned it inside out to check the lining, I noticed a patch near the inner pocket that felt thicker than the rest. Curious, I tugged gently at the thread holding it down and found a small square of white fabric sewn into the lining. It had only 3 words stitched in black thread: "Do not wear this home." My stomach dropped. It was not the words themselves, but the precision of the stitching and the deliberate way it had been hidden. The thread was neat and tightly sewn, like whoever did it had meant for someone to find it eventually, but not right away. My first instinct was to laugh it off. Maybe it was a joke or some kind of weird prank, but something in my gut said otherwise. I set the jacket aside and left it on the back of a chair. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that message in the dark. I kept thinking about how clean the note was, how careful the sewing had been, and how new the jacket felt compared to everything else in that store. I could not shake the feeling that I had picked up something I was not meant to find. The next morning, I called the thrift store. I asked if they remembered anything about the jacket, maybe who dropped it off. The woman on the line said all donations were anonymous, and they rarely got anything military style. When I asked if she had seen notes sewn into clothes before, there was a pause before she answered. She said no, but her tone had shifted slightly, like she was trying to end the call quickly. I decided not to wear the jacket. Instead, I folded it carefully and left it in the trunk of my car. But even then, strange things began happening. I started waking up at odd hours, always around 3 in the a.m., with the feeling that someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. The air in my apartment felt heavier. Not cold exactly, but dense, like walking into a room that had not been opened in years. Lights flickered occasionally and appliances turned off without warning. I told myself it was faulty wiring, or maybe my building was just old. Still, Every time I walked past the chair where I had first placed the jacket, I felt a chill run down my back. I stopped inviting people over. I felt foolish even talking about it. How could I explain that I was afraid of a coat? One night I came home from work and noticed my door was slightly ajar. Nothing appeared to be missing, but there was a faint smell in the air, like metal and damp earth. The jacket was gone from the trunk, but I had not moved it. I searched the apartment top to bottom and finally found it hanging neatly in my closet, as if it had always belonged there. I locked the closet and slept on the couch that night. I knew then that this was not something I could ignore. I drove to a nearby park and threw the jacket into one of the large dumpsters near the edge of the lot. I did not care who found it next, as long as it was gone. For a few days, things felt normal again. The air lightened. The flickering stopped. I started sleeping through the night. Then, 5 days later, the jacket showed up again, folded on my bed. No dust, no dirt, no sign that it had ever been in a dumpster. I moved out that week, breaking my lease and paying the penalty. I found a studio on the other side of the city. New space, new locks, nothing from the old apartment came with me. Not even the furniture. I left the jacket inside the old closet and never looked back. Months passed without incident. I stopped thinking about the jacket except in brief flashes, usually during long drives or quiet moments just before sleep. But then, one afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was the jacket, folded exactly the same way, with a new note sewn into the lining. This one reads, "You brought it with you." I dropped the package and backed away. I wanted to run, scream, anything. But I forced myself to stay calm. I burned it that night in a steel barrel behind a friend's farm, soaking it in gasoline before lighting the match. The flames burned high and hot, the smoke thick and black. I waited until nothing remained but ash. From that day on, nothing followed me. The air stayed clear. No more flickering lights, no strange smells. My sleep returned. I got used to silence again. Whatever it was tied to that jacket and that message. I had ignored the warning once, but I had not worn it home. I had brought it home in my car, yes, but I had never slipped my arms through the sleeves. I had never worn it. Some part of me believes that was the only thing that saved me. The warning had been clear. Whoever left it knew what they were doing. I do not know what would have happened if I had ignored it completely, but I do not think I would be here now if I had. Now, whenever I go into a thrift store, I check every pocket and lining before I buy anything. I do not care if it looks brand new or fits perfectly. I learned to trust that uneasy feeling in my stomach. Some things are not meant to be owned, and some warnings are meant to be followed, no matter how strange they seem. Story 9. It started around 1 in the morning. I had just finished washing the dishes and was settling into the couch with a blanket wrapped around me. The silence in the house was comforting, only broken by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor. Then came the first knock. It was soft, barely noticeable, like someone politely asking for attention. I paused and looked toward the front door, but no one was supposed to be visiting, especially not at that hour. I waited, unsure if I had imagined it. A few minutes passed and nothing else happened. I told myself it could have been the wind or some random noise from the neighborhood. I checked the front porch through the peephole, but no one was there. The street was empty under the dim yellow glow of the streetlight. I locked the door again, even though it already was, and returned to the living room. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling through short videos to distract myself, but my ears were tuned in now, waiting. At 1:10 a.m., there was another knock. This one was louder. I jumped. The knock was firmer, more deliberate. It wasn't just someone passing by. I stood up and walked slowly to the door. My heart thumped with each step. I looked again through the peephole. Still nothing. I turned on the porch light this time, hoping the brightness would scare off whoever it was, if anyone was actually there. For the next few minutes, I debated calling someone. But who would I call at this hour without sounding paranoid? I thought about calling a friend, but I didn't want to seem ridiculous. It was just knocking, and nothing had happened. Not yet. At 1:15 a.m., another knock came. It was even harder this time, enough to rattle the door. I froze. This wasn't a prank or a coincidence. Whoever it was, they were coming back on purpose. I backed away slowly, not turning my back on the door. I moved to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. It felt stupid, but holding it gave me a little sense of control. I sat on the floor by the kitchen counter, where I had a clear view of the hallway leading to the front door. I turned off the lights in the house. I didn't want to be seen. Every 5 minutes, the knock came again. 1:20 a.m., 1:25 a.m. Each knock grew more aggressive. The sound echoed through the house, hitting my chest like a punch. I didn't cry, but I was close. I checked the back door and windows, making sure everything was locked. I even pushed furniture in front of the doors, just in case. My phone was fully charged, and I kept my thumb hovering over the emergency dial screen. I didn't call, though. Something in me wanted to wait and see. At around 2 a.m., the knocking had turned into pounding. I could hear the frustration or maybe even anger behind each slam. I stayed low and quiet listening. I started recording on my phone, just in case I needed proof later. Every few minutes, the pounding returned like clockwork. I texted a friend, letting them know something weird was happening. No reply. I checked social media to see if others in the neighborhood were posting about it, but there was nothing. Just me. Just this house. Just those knocks. At 2:30 a.m., I began to feel like I was under siege. I remembered every horror movie I had ever watched and every story where things started like this. My imagination twisted each sound into something worse than it likely was. But this was real. The door shook with every knock now. I moved upstairs to the bedroom, hoping to feel safer on the second floor. I could still hear the knocks, even from up there. I turned off all the lights again and hid in the closet. My phone screen glowed too bright in the dark. I adjusted the brightness to the lowest setting. I stayed in that closet for what felt like hours. The knocking never stopped. Every 5 minutes. 3 a.m., 3:05 a.m., 3:10 a.m. Like someone had set a timer. I wondered what they wanted. Why they didn't just break in. Why they kept knocking instead. I started whispering to myself, telling myself it would be fine, and that no one had gotten in. That the door was strong. That morning would come. That someone, anyone, would see or hear and help. I thought about calling the police but kept stopping myself. What would I say? That someone was knocking and not doing anything else. It didn't feel like enough, but inside I knew I should have called. I just felt frozen. By 4 a.m., the knocks were slams. It sounded like someone was throwing their whole weight into the door. I checked the lock camera, but it showed nothing, just the empty porch. But the sound was real. I wasn't imagining it. I considered running outside and screaming, but I was scared that would be what they wanted, that it would bring them in. I stayed put, phone still in hand, knife still on the floor beside me. My legs were cramping, but I didn't dare move. 4:30 a.m., still knocking. My eyes were heavy, but adrenaline kept me awake. I kept thinking it had to stop soon, that no one would keep this up all night. But they did. They kept going. By 5 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I finally called the police and whispered what was happening. The operator told me to stay calm and that someone would be sent. I felt a strange relief just from making the call. Like I wasn't alone anymore, even if help wasn't here yet. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The knocking continued, right on schedule. I stayed upstairs, peeking through the curtain with just enough space to see the street. At 5:30 a.m., a patrol car rolled slowly to a stop in front of my house. I didn't move at first. I watched as an officer stepped out and walked to the porch. The knocking had just happened again, so I knew the person was nearby. The officer looked around and knocked on the door himself. I came down, slowly, heart racing. I opened the door just enough to speak. The officer asked if I was the one who called. I nodded. He said they hadn't seen anyone on the way in, but they would check the area. I asked him to look at the porch camera. It had not recorded anything. He went around the house, flashlight sweeping across the lawn and bushes. After 10 minutes, he returned and said nothing was found. No footprints, no signs of anyone being there. He asked if I wanted to file a report. I said yes. The report didn't do much, but writing it down made me feel a little more grounded. The officer stayed a little while longer, then left when the sky began to lighten. By 6 a.m., the knocks had stopped. The silence felt unnatural after so many hours of tension. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the knife beside me and the curtains wide open. I watched the sky turn pink. Birds began to chirp. Morning came. People started walking dogs and heading to work as if nothing had happened. Later that morning, a neighbor stopped by and mentioned hearing something around 1 or 2 a.m., but assumed it was just a stray cat or someone delivering flyers. I nodded and didn't explain. I didn't want to seem paranoid. That night, I slept with the lights on. No knocks came, and they never returned. Days passed, then weeks. I never found out who it was or what they wanted. But they never came back. I started going outside more often again. I stopped jumping at every sound. Eventually, I even stopped keeping the knife next to my bed. Life settled back into something normal. Whatever it was, it passed. But I always remember that night. And every time I hear a knock, even during the day, I still hesitate. Just for a second. Until I remind myself I am not alone. Not anymore. Mon. Story 10. I answered a tech support call one afternoon. The voice on the other end sounded calm but urgent. They said there was a problem with my computer and it needed immediate attention. At first I was cautious, but the person seemed knowledgeable and convincing. I thought they were genuine and wanted to help me avoid a serious issue. They asked me to open a website and then guide them through what I was seeing. I followed their instructions carefully, trusting that I was doing the right thing. They told me to download a program that would let them access my computer remotely. I hesitated for a moment, but then agreed because I wanted the problem fixed quickly. I did not realize how dangerous this decision would turn out to be. Once they gained access, they started pointing out supposed problems on my system. They said my accounts were at risk and that they needed to secure everything right away. They instructed me to give them passwords and security codes. I felt nervous but believed it was necessary. I was already trusting them too much without questioning. Within minutes, things started to go wrong. I realized I was no longer able to log into my email or bank accounts. Panic started to rise as I tried to regain control. Every account I owned was suddenly locked. I could not reset passwords because they had changed all the recovery information. I was completely locked out, and the feeling was terrifying. I immediately tried to contact the real support teams of my accounts. They told me that there had been suspicious login attempts and that my accounts were frozen to prevent fraud. I explained the situation, but they said there was little they could do without verifying my identity first. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I could not escape. The scammers had already